Yeah, the idea of some of the things that we're doing is we're trying to go a bit deeper into all these ideas that are being discussed in the Kurdish Freedom Movement, the new concepts like democratic conflict-ridden that have been have come up and been discussed in the last couple of years, and we think they deserve a wider investigation, research around it, and we try to build a bridges there to the rest of the world, to other activists, to other academic institutions, to investigate, research, and spread the word on these things. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah. So the title is from the title of the speech is from a quote from Antonio Negri, Öcalan the prisoner. It's from a short essay that he wrote as a foreword to one of the translations of Öcalan's books. Öcalan the prisoner, who's becoming mythical as Mandela was in the 20th century, so he's in the 21st. He expresses a series of concepts that in the 21st century are increasingly becoming the building blocks for the political construction of a new world. So I took the title for 3 days entirely from this quote, because I think he hits the nail on the head with the concepts and the building blocks. Something that the Kurdish movement is doing, especially what Öcalan is doing, is to take concepts and reinterpret them, turn them on their head, change them around, create new ones, to find a solution to real problems in the movement, but also in the political situation of the world in general, the problems that we're facing in capitalist modernity. So I want to go a little bit into these concepts, some of them today, some in the other days. Maybe not so much into current events or political strategies or these things, but more on the conceptual side of things. I chose this picture of Antonio Negri because to remind that he also was a political prisoner. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison for his political activity. Fortunately, he could escape that sentence, so he didn't have to stay for 30 years in prison. He was able to continue his work and write other books. This and other texts you find in the book that you can see on the title of which you can find there. It's called Building Free Life, Dialogues with Öcalan, where we have collected a lot of texts that other people have written on Öcalan, on his concepts, where they have been engaging and interacting with these concepts. So hopefully we'll get another volume out of these soon. But actually, maybe if some of you have seen this book or read some of them, I think it's actually one of your faculty members here has also a chapter in the book. And it's kind of similar to what we're doing with this journal. It's called Democratic Modernity. There's also a lot of authors, again, some also writing on these on the concepts and ideas or engaging with them from different perspectives, and I hope it's an interesting way of doing these things. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I want to make a short introduction into what Öcalan represents. Like most people know, he has been the founder of the PKK, which has recently been dissolved for the second time, because he was already once dissolved in 2002 and then reformed in 2005. And that he's a political prisoner in isolation. It's close to 30 years now that he has been in almost total isolation. Some of that a bit later. Of course, he's also active politically as a politician who has wide support in Kurdish society and is right now again in a negotiation process with the Turkish state. What many people do not know is that he has not only in prison started writing books, but that there's all more than which he has published through the decades. So he has always been somebody who's engaging with ideas and concepts, and not as he was sometimes portrayed for some guerrilla leader or something like that. Right now I said there's this is peace process. It's actually an old thing from 2015, but now again there's negotiations going on. So, but I don't want to go very much into this. And yes, his writing, his politics, his organization has inspired the Rojava Revolution, which most of you have probably watched the movie now before this. I don't know who was in it, but recognize some faces, so probably most of you have seen it. Next slide. Thank you. A little bit on the isolation without going too much into detail. You see there this red shape is the island, Imran Island. It's a prison island in the Marmara Sea, which is between the two straits, Turkey, between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. It's pretty close to Istanbul, but very difficult to get there. Which makes it extremely difficult to visit them anyway, also for the lawyers. For more than 10 years, he was there completely alone. Like for 1 hour a week, he had to visit from his lawyers. But apart from that, he was completely alone. And he wasn't completely alone on the island because there was more than 1,000 soldiers at garrison. But they were also not allowed to speak with him. So he was basically alone. He wasn't even allowed to, not even when he had visitors, to shake hands or to touch anybody, but he wasn't allowed to touch any living being. So as soon as there was a piece of grass in the yard or something, they would tear it out and put poison on it or whatever. So he couldn't even touch a plant or anything. So then after a while, there was some other prisoners also moved to the island. So changed a little bit up and down. Right now there's 4 other, 3 others, actually no right now. At least 3 others, I think 4 others right now. That he has now at last a bit more possibility to discuss and do things with. Next please. I almost do the slides, so I don't have 50 slides or so on the set. Why the isolation? Why is he treated so differently from other prisoners, especially political prisoners in Turkey? I must maybe emphasize, since we are in the US here, that this kind of long-term total isolation is not something that is very usual in Turkey or many other countries. I know that there's years long, many prisoners are isolated for a very, very extremely long time, but this is not so usual elsewhere. And in Turkey, not at all. These prison conditions are absolutely unique. Nobody else has this in Turkey or had this. So the thing is, he's pretty influential. He has a big organization that he founded and inspired that is curious to hear anything he has to say. He's also influential on the general Turkish society or society in Turkey, because every time he's able to say something, it really is he's able to diffuse tensions. He's making surprising suggestions to move dialogue process forward. He has been very successful at that, and so there's people who don't want him to speak out. So that's why he's been isolated for a very, very long time. And we think, now most of you have read a bit of him, I know about him, agree that he's one of the worldwide, one of the most important voices of oppressed peoples in the world. And we'll go a little bit into what this is all about. Next, please. Thank you. He has become known in the last 15-20 years, especially for his books, which are the first books that have been translated into Western languages. So there was not much available of him before his abduction and incarceration. Yeah, these books have changed the political landscape in Kurdistan quite a bit, has given new direction to the freedom movement, and the reasons is, some of them I want to discuss here a bit. So the important point is that he's everything he's writing is not writing for fun or for intellectual interest or something, but it's very, very closely connected to the actual existing political problems or problems in his organization or other kinds of problems that he sees. So it's not just for the sake of doing research and developing ideas, but it's always very closely connected to trying to solve problems, and he's feeling a big responsibility for that. And he's like, okay, this movement has come about, like I founded it, I have been directing for a very long time, so it's also my responsibility to do everything that it's still successful, or that the Kurdish issue and all the conflicts are resolved in a positive way. This is, I think, quite important. And of course, if we look at the political landscape in the Middle East, some things are very short-lived. Things can change very quickly, but he's of course one of the, let's say, leading politicians that has also a lot of experience. Like, we think of which people he has been engaging, like which heads of state in the last couple of decades, which are now gone. He's still around and in the center of politics in Kurdistan. So he has a vast amount of experience also that he wants to share and wants to make bring to good use. Another important point, I think, is what's in this book is criticism and self-criticism concerning previous concepts, like the concept of the armed struggle, of the guerrilla warfare, of an independent, united, socialist Kurdistan, like what was things that in time, yes, come to see as like very problematic, very wrong, or have in practice, in real life, had negative consequences, unintended maybe, but so he's very radical and very sincere in the criticism of these things, like, and that's what makes it like credible and possible for people to also engage with this kind of criticism and then really change things. Let's give that next, please. Okay, so what I want to try to do today is like explain or show a little bit where he has had kind of unusual ideas, or is trying to radicalize concepts, or is changing them, taking them up and modifying them. Give a couple of examples for that. A bit unconnected maybe, or trying to connect them a little bit. So just to show like in which areas I'm talking about. So this was like the first thing. If you think of a colony, that's usually some place overseas, or at least a bit far away from the so-called motherland. That has like very different structures, like militarily maybe occupied, or somehow like directly exploited by companies. So like everybody has an idea about the colony. So in the 1970s, the predominant view of the left in Turkey, where Öcalan then was as a young student, he had already worked in civil service. He was a bit older than the other students in his year. Was that actually Turkey was some kind of half colony, that it's like not fully independent. It's like under the thumb of the US or Western imperialism, or at least not fully independent. And one goal of a large part of the left was to make it like fully independent. So Turkey they saw as a half colony. Almost maybe mention that it was at the time the republic, like in '73, was just 50 years old, so it was like a relatively new state. Other states were even younger, like I think Syria and Iraq were created in the current form as republics even later, so they were even younger. So this whole system was still maybe needs some interpretation. Iran is of course different, has a very long state tradition. So and then Öcalan came up and said, no, what the situation of Kurdistan is actually, it's a colony. So everybody was like, what? What are you saying? Like, Turkey is a colony, or half colony, colonies can't have colonies, that's impossible. And he came with this idea, he convinced, in the beginning maybe not very, very many people, but the idea was striking, to say the situation that we're facing here is actually, it's an internal colony of several states, not only of one state, but of Turkey, but of several states. So, and many people did not buy that, but if we now look back like 50 years later, it was, it hit like a bomb really. So now the understanding is like very widespread that this was actually true, that the, and what they did, they read everything about, what has been written about colonialism, they looked into all these liberation struggles which were already like, they were kind of latecomers, because many like colonies in different continents had actually become independent by the 1970s. The age of decolonization was over, and then they came up, so it was all maybe a bit late. But they saw themselves in these relationships, like saying, what this colonialism does with our heads is terrible. So we are all like we are sick. There are no healthy people. That's quote that I like a lot. Says there's no healthy person in Kurdistan. Like everybody's sick unless we create them. So it was not just from the beginning. It was not just the idea of getting some more independent and self-determination, but also to like get away from this colonial mindset and heal themselves by taking action against this these different forms of oppression. So that was pretty novel and original idea at the time. This is already the last slide. Thank you very much. You can, if you like, go back to the first or something. So that I have others from other. Can maybe go back to the first because they don't know. Thank you. So this was maybe the first really original idea where he used the concept in a different way. And some others I want to now list, which jumping a bit from topic to topic, especially things from the last couple of books. So now maybe I take a step back and why is all this important? Like why is it important that there's an original thinker and that there's a movement that takes up these ideas? Now, if you've watched the movie, and most of you have, there is an incredible resilience in the Kurdish struggle. There's a people that has gone through hell in several occasions and several times. In the Turkish occupied part, it has almost been wiped out. The knowledge that they are even Kurds, they were until today, and most people don't speak the language properly, although it's like the mother language because it's taught nowhere. And in those times, like 50 years ago, it was like completely banned. You couldn't talk it in the streets or anything. But there and elsewhere, it has proven to be extremely resilient. The struggle against Islamic State may be one most extreme example, but there are others, also other films about other events that show this a lot. So what creates this? How is this more than just a national liberation struggle? So this is a bit like the question I wanna come from, how is it possible to create something more than a fighting organization for some cause? So the next thing is the role of education. So this is what the movement did in its early days was to educate itself, because the knowledge about like Kurdistan was completely buried. All the books were banned. They were very difficult to get. Maybe in other countries, other languages, there was some literature, but so it was very valuable to find even some information to get from the other parts of Kurdistan. So they did a lot of self-education about all these blind spots, and all these things that were that they didn't know, and created their their own body of knowledge. So and then what they again has something that they did totally different from everybody else. It was like this age of revolutionary movements, like after the '68 movement in the USA and in Europe. There was a similar thing in many countries in the Middle East. So there was a big revolutionary upsurge in Turkey, for instance, with really big organizations in the early '70s, throughout the '70s actually. And what everybody did is when they had developed some ideas and some political line, they would just they would publish a newspaper or a magazine or something, like more or less regularly, to promote their own ideas. And like Öcalan and his movement, they said we don't do that. So we don't have a newspaper, we are the newspaper. So they would educate themselves and each other, and just be like able to explain the things to everybody in the same way, so without contradictions or wide range of things. So that was another very like surprising move, which was also good against the repression, because there's nothing written. It's much more difficult to put a hand on for the state, or to prove what the ideas really are, what they're promoting, what they're propagating. That's maybe interesting details from terms of methodology. So I wanna, everybody who has read a little bit of Öcalan knows that it's a lot about history. It's sometimes going back very far in history, which is also pretty unusual. So, like, why is it like that? So the basic idea, or the basic philosophy behind that, is to say, if you want to understand something, and I'm going to give examples like the state, or capitalism, or patriarchy. If you really want to understand something, so what one normally do, like read a lot of books that have been written in the last 15 or 100 years by people who know very well, and all these things. And Öcalan says, no, if you want to really understand something, you have to understand from its beginning. So that's much more important to get the whole arc, the whole story, because the basic structures, for instance, of patriarchy, are not from the last 100 or 200 years, but it's like very, very old, and has gone through a lot of changes in a lot of societies and a lot of different circumstances. So what we have in the end is kind of a conundrum. It's a mix. It's a mess of problems, and you can understand like where all this comes from and how this has then perpetuated itself through times. If you look at the very beginning, like how did it start and what was then able to perpetuate itself through time. So, and that is a reason why he then looks really into the like very, very oldest written history, and even some, not written history, like even beyond that, like goes into anthropological research, or other things that I'll mention. So this is if one goes a bit like, reads a bit longer or somewhat, this is kind of really changing the perspective, like to look at things from this way in a very, very long time frame, and especially not only at what happened in the time, but also at the beginning. So I'm going to get into this, like these things I mentioned, patriarchy, capitalism, and state, maybe a bit later, or I can just jump into the state. So state is like a bit of a mystery, like what I mean, everybody talks about the state, but what really is the state is not so clear. So it's it appears that there are different forms of state, they call themselves different names, they are maybe differently structured, they have existed in different times in completely different, systems. They could be like, they could call themselves socialist, or they could call themselves whatever, independent, or they could call themselves a republic, or an empire, or a kingdom. Could call themselves like, I don't know, put some theological things there, like it's like God's will this way, I don't know, what's the Islamic Republic Iran, it's like
theocracy.
Yeah, that's what they don't call themselves, theocracy, but it is. Yeah. I was looking for terms that they would call themselves, like things like that. So like you can go into all kinds of definitions of the state. But the essence is very difficult to grasp, right? Like, what is it really? And also it has, very, very different functions. So some of them are like good and useful, you would say, and others are not. And according to different reviews, it's questionable, like, which is always the other. But it's a lot of different things. So there has been a writer, a jurist, whose name is, I don't know, has become a bit more popular recently again, Carl Schmitt. He's not a very sympathetic guy, to say the least. But was a very clever guy, and he's written a lot of interesting stuff. And he pointed to the fact that the how do you say, like the concepts that today's states have, or like that modern states have, including like their names, actually are theological concepts. They come from Christian theology. I don't really know like what you look into the Latin names of all these things, but things like sovereignty are really derived from how the church talked about the relationship of God and the people. So modern state theory has taken over this term. Now Öcalan takes this idea with direct references, like to what Carl Schmitt said, and radicalizes this a lot. It goes into the real historic research, like how did the state like actually come about, like what not only what were the first states, like where were they and when were they and what were they, but like what was their enduring characteristics, what is really still like the same today. Of course, with all new things that have changed. And maybe even more importantly, and that's like the next concept, he's always asking, like he's taking the dialectics of Hegel very seriously. He says if something comes up, like if there's something new, like an innovation, that is not just like suddenly growing, but it's against something. It is directed against something that was before, or exists at the same time and tries to, push it away and to break it or to change it. So if we then look at the real history, like of the state, like where it really started, which was incidentally in southern Mesopotamia, so in the south of today's Iraq, where around 6,000, 5,000 years ago, these Sumerian city-states emerged, or were founded or were created. But then at the time, of course, they were just only there. In the rest of the world, there were no states, right? So they had then to kind of fight their way through history to now cover the whole face of the earth. There's almost no point. There are no states now, but at that time it was completely the opposite. There were only in a tiny part of the world there were states, and everywhere else there were. But also where they were, there was something before that. So there must have been other structures that they were then, like, if we put it a bit positive, like trying to be the alternative to, or in a more negative way, say, okay, that they were fighting against. And they were really fighting from day one, really. They were fighting against each other, and they were actually starting some kind of very early imperialism by extracting resources from the territories around them. If we look at like today's Iraq, or the buildings that they built, these ziggurat temples, they were all made from what's that in English, like clay, but like the like mud bricks.
Adobe.
Yeah, right, thank you. Adobe. Because there are no stones there. It's all, there's these big rivers, Euphrates and Tigris, and around them is a lot of soil but no stones. So they didn't build with stones, so they need the stones if they want to build something with stones. But they also had no, there were no trees. Or pretty soon there were no trees anymore, I don't know. But trees were in some areas around them. Like, you know, these the biblical stories of the cedars of Lebanon. So like up the Euphrates there were trees. And on the other side, in the Zagros Mountains, like today's border between Iraq and Iran, or actually the heart of Kurdistan, these mountains, there were trees. So what they did is they went and got that, and they were faced with resistance, which they then militarily suppressed. So like very, very early on, like the first states showed already like a behavior that in the 19th century then would be called imperialism. So if we look at it that way, we find very striking similarities actually. Not only in that regard, but also there's a whole bunch of other things that were introduced in these very, very early city-states 5,000 years ago that we still have today. For instance, compulsory school education is that old. Of course, then, as also in many areas of the world in later time, it was only for boys. Because patriarchy was already quite well established, not fully established. We're going to come to that, but so that was the kind of structure. Then you have a state structure with something you can call like ministries. You have like a ruling person or a group which organizes the state apparatus according to functions, different areas of administration, and had basically the same structure as ministries. Of course, like in modern states, is so much bigger, it's much more personal maybe, but the basic structure is the same. So there's actually big, I could go on and on. There's a guy from the University of Chicago in the 50s, 60s. He has written a book, I don't know the English title really. I think it's like 37 firsts in history or something like that. Seminar drama. Maybe it was 37, maybe it was 27, or 39 or something, who knows?
17?
17 only? Must be more. I think it's more than 20. I don't know. So like things like this, the things I've now quoted are basically from that book. It also makes the point that many of the things were already like pretty early on. So and then like Öcalan takes and says, okay, so this is how we have to look at the state. So there it was like very simple and very clear in a lot of dimensions. The next dimension is, coming back to Carl Schmitt and his theological stuff, it says it was like really created by the priests. It wasn't just this, it's no coincidence that the state's terminology is similar to what the theology in the Middle Ages or in the Christian church was. Like even back then, it was a construct of the priests who ran the whole thing. And then later evolved into something even more than priests. So then you had these god kings. Like we know this most in the context, maybe people have really read Sumerian history, so mostly like in the context of the Roman Empire, where after the Republic was born and they had an emperor, and then they were pretty soon gods. So they had to be like worshipped, they got their own temples, and there was this one little tribe in Palestine that had its own god, and monotheism, and said, this is not a good idea. Humans can be gods, we're going to get to that later as well. Plays important role in history. But these first states were created by the priests, and Öcalan then wonders that because it takes stuff seriously. It's not just a curious, strange incident which is like kind of interesting to everyone. Like it says, what's the point of this? Like why is, what purpose does it serve that like priests construct and run the state? So that's a serious question. And then it comes to the role of ideology. We know maybe from this Marxist scheme of history of subsequent societies that at first is primitive or primordial, I don't know what the current fancy translation of that is in German, it's Urgesellschaft or Urkommunismus. So like this primitive communism, and then you have this big jump to the slaveholder society, where no communism anymore, no equality anymore, but then you have the biggest thinkable hierarchy between fellow humans, which is like slave and slaveholder, and then feudalism, capitalism, the thing goes on. So the question is like, what made people even accept that? Like, why were they like living there? Like, if there are only these tiny states that had these slave thing, like, why did they just go away? Or elsewhere? Like, wherever, after the slaves, we emphasize very much freedom to go away. One of the fundamental freedoms, and I think also David Reimar, lecture here on exactly that topic. So Öcalan, then here the priests come in. The priests create a mythology that serves the purpose to keep everything together, to legitimize the state, and to give people something to believe in. Like, now how does this work? So here's like the next thing that Öcalan maybe didn't really invent himself, but takes very, very seriously, is this look at mythology. One of the leading questions here was like, are myths, is mythology just some superstition stories from the past that are of no further importance? Öcalan looks at this and says, no, this is the way, he used the term, like I think quote from Foucault, like regimes of truth. It's the way people think about the world in a certain time. So today, maybe not everybody, but fundamentally, like the university here. So it's kind of science that we are thinking the world in terms of when we think about what it looks like, its relationship to the universe, or matter and substances and everything. So there's a lot of scientific knowledge about, but everybody believes everything that science says, but that's a different story. But that's the fundamental way of thinking about the world. So that was fundamentally different in other times, and in those times it was mythology. So people told themselves stories which were about superhuman creatures or not, about spirits and different things as an understanding of the world or of society, or what is good, what is bad, how people should behave and everything. So the thinking about this was done in myths. So when we then have myths that are written and we can still read today, we should take that very seriously. It's not like, unimportant stories that are kind of funny, or creatures that don't exist or anything, but it's social history. So the conflicts that we're seeing there between the different persons, gods, whatever forces, are a reflection of what's happening in the world. So just like somebody writes a science fiction novel, often they deal with our problems and conflicts of today that is then located in some other planet or whatever. But if they would deal with something completely different, nobody would understand what it's about. So it's in relationship to actual society. So the myth that we can still find are actually social history, and the conflicts in there are the actual social conflicts and the way it was talked about them at the time. And since Öcalan's approach is to take the beginning of things very seriously, he does this through, or he uses these as a source of knowledge about this early history. And then we arrive at, there's like books, some people, again, Samuel Kramer has translated, students and fellow academics have translated a lot of these Sumerian, what are they called? This kind of writing, cuneiform. I don't know how it's pronounced, I know how it's written, but cuneiform. Yeah, something like that. They translated a lot of the stuff, a lot of the things they found, the texts that were found from the time were actually pretty, that was interesting in a way, but it was stuff like bills and counting how many sheep and how many tons of grain were sold, and so it was more commercial writing. But literature was there was some myths, some stories about kings and gods and this and that. So I'm gonna maybe mention 2 or 3 of them to get the idea how these myths can be very easily, if you have the right perspective, read as social history. So one is about the creation of humans. There are several stories actually, even already then they had several, maybe in the Bible as we know it, or in the Genesis and the Torah. Already there are two different stories, right? That's common knowledge, like there's the creation up to the thing, and when that story is finished and you read on, then it starts again. So they are like 2 stories put next to each other. They weren't synthesized, they were just, whoever put the stuff together, just put them next to each other. So they also have different ones, and one of them is basically that story from the Bible about that one creature was created from the rib of another creature. It's not exactly the same, it's not like, directly man and woman does that, but it's a conflict between the sexes definitely in that story. I'm not gonna go into that now. But that's like one of the creation stories, and the other is the slaveholder society and the people in charge, like the priests who run these states and make the stories, or right now at least. So there's these gods that are bored, they are gods, and they don't want to work for each other because they are gods. So they don't want to serve and cook for each other and serve drinks and this and that. So they create the humans to serve them. Clear idea. Also makes clear to everybody what their place is. There are people who are served and others who serve. So it fits very well with the slaveholder society. And what they are created from, in the Bible, it's like from earth, like from mud, mud. Mud. It's like this red earth. I think anybody who knows Arabic better than me, it's like this word Adam or Adem. It actually means like red soil, something like that. And that's how I read it. I don't know if people who know Arabic can confirm that that's really like that. So in that story, they're made from something that people translate differently, but or there are maybe discussions about how to translate it, but literally, it's shit. It's the excrements of the gods not red soil, but like about 4 hours, close to finish, I guess, for today. So that's another story that's pretty interesting. On actually the conflict of the sexes, of the genders there's the big goddess of Uruk, the city of Gilgamesh, where the first epic is. Inanna is her name. She later appears in different other versions, like there's in Semitic language it's more Ishtar and Astarte in the Levant, and so there's like different names, but it's a kind of not really mother goddess, because there's also like a more motherly figure, but she's like has a lot of attributes. She's like super popular. She shows up in a lot of myths. She also has this kind of double character of being the goddess of love, but also of like war. So she already has this character that later, like Athens in Greece, and or a bit also Venus in Rome. Also the stars in Venus, so that's that goes this whole thing. With this, Venus is either the morning star or the evening star. So according to the movements of the planets. So has this kind of double character, and she as well. But she's super popular, especially among women, but also in general. And she's the city goddess of one of the most powerful states there. And then there's this other god, Enki, who is more like he's playing tricks, he's cheating, he's pitting the gods against each other, he's making plots, all kinds of stuff. He's a bit like this, I don't know if people watch these Marvel movies, there's this Loki, the brother of Thor. A bit like that, really. So it's like an archetype maybe that goes throughout Europe. And she confronts him and says, "You have stolen all my." It's the original term is "me." It's very discussed, like how to translate that. There's a new suggestion that's used to translate as rituals. So, but the point is, these are all the things that are important for humans as society. So there's a long list of over 100 of these me, which is things like, music and dance and song on the one hand, and there's all the crafts. There's like, the tool making and the plowing or the plow itself, or the instruments like the drum or the flute, or all these things. But also things like kingship. Like all kinds of cultural achievements are these names. And now Inanna goes to Enki and says to him, like, you stole them from me. Like, they were all mine, and you have just taken them and stolen them and taken them to another city, and I want them back. And then there's a very entertaining story that unfolds, because he says, okay, let's fight it out by seeing who can drink more beer. Beer is also already very well established in Sumerian times, like 5,000 years ago. It's actually much older in Göbekli Tepe, like another 4,000 years ago there had already beer. So they make a drinking contest, like who can drink more beer, and Inanna is clever. She, instead of really drinking all the beer, she just takes it and puts it into a plant that's standing there, some palm also. So in the end, Enki is totally drunk and can't move anymore, and she takes her maid back and triumphant entry into the city, and the myth sings her praise. So what's the story here? Like, if you take this seriously and not just as an entertaining, frivolous story, it's the fact that, that's Öcalan's interpretation, but I think it's pretty convincing, that much, if not all, of the cultural achievements or societal achievements that have been created up to then are actually women's. So they, at some earlier point, were the ones who were seen as the creators of all that. And that's what it means to say, okay, these are mine and you've stolen them from me. So we don't have any other kind of written record. We have some archaeology stuff like Gordon Child, a prehistorian archaeologist, that's the guy who brought up this term, the Neolithic Revolution. He has argued a long time ago already that much of the achievements of agriculture, of the techniques of producing food, instead of just finding and foraging and hunting and all, were actually the product of women. So this story goes pretty much in the same direction. So there, if we look at what I said before, if we have this new society, this state society, which is pretty much exclusively run by men, we have all these priests. Not all priests are men. There's women priests have for the goddesses. They have their priestess. They even have some priestesses that can change their gender, according to need or will, or a very interesting story there. But the ones who really run the state are the men. So they have certain religious functions, these temples of the goddesses in most cities. But the state, the armed forces, everything is actually really run by men. The boys go to school, as I said before. So this is, and then you have these stories about this kind of conflict. They're not able to completely suppress the fact that before there was something else. So they make it into an entertaining story, in which then subsequently, if you look through the centuries, the role of the goddesses becomes less and less important. And the fighting gods, the warring gods, the armed gods, and everything, they become much more prominent in later time. So there we see a movement, a development in history. And when the consequence, according to this, if you go with this method that I explained, then you say, okay, so there was something else before that was not in the same extreme patriarchal way organized, but in a very different way. There was before that society determined, not run in the same way, but built, held together, and led by women. And we find the traces in these myths that most people have never heard about, or find not so important, or can just outright, say, I don't believe this shit, patriarchy was there forever. You can come and claim otherwise. So yeah, I'll leave it at this for today. We still have 2 days. I hope it was interesting enough that you come back to me. Or maybe you're obliged. I don't know.
Back to me.